he had never been off his feet. 61 international matches, 61 wins, 11 years, 4 continents. And in all of it, no referee, no opponent, and no camera ever saw him lose his balance. Not once. His name was Carl Vandermeer. The instructors at the Kodokan, the mother temple of judo, gave him a second name. He was a young American sergeant on his first tour of Tokyo, and their best black belts took turns trying to put him down for 2 hours. When it was over, the master of the hall bowed to him and named him something that translates loosely as the pillar. It was not a compliment, it was a measurement. Tokyo, 1964, the Olympic semifinal, across the mat. A Soviet heavyweight, 6'4", 40 pounds heavier, a neck that filled his collar, the reigning champion of Europe. He had beaten every man in his path to the semifinal. The match that made Vandermeer's name known to the world lasted 8 seconds. A grip, a turn, and the big man went through a wall of flashbulbs into the timekeeper's table. The scoreboard hadn't finished spelling Vandermeer's name. After that night, referees started standing a step closer to his matches because they knew how quickly it would be over. Every art has a law it teaches on the first day. Judo's law, everything eventually goes to the ground. Every judoka of his era found out it had an exception, and the exception was Carl Vandermeer. This is the story of the summer night in 1967 when the pillar flew to Long Beach, California, and sat in the third row of a martial arts tournament to watch a small man knock a volunteer half a foot taller out of a folding chair with a punch that traveled 1 inch. 4,000 people stood up and cheered a miracle. One judoka stood up to call it a lie. What happened in the next 4 minutes was never filmed. 9 photographs survived. One shows a knee buckling that had never buckled in 11 years. One shows a smile with blood on it. The last one shows an open hand. It is the story of how the pillar was put on the ground for the first time in his life by a small man called Bruce Lee.
Folks ask what I remember. I remember him passing my stand, didn't see his face. I sensed an odd smell in the air. Just when I felt his presence, he was gone.
To understand the man in the third row, you have to go back 25 years to a city that had been burned off the map. Carl Vandermeer was born in Rotterdam in 1933 under the harbor cranes. He was 6 years old when the bombers came and the center of his city disappeared in an afternoon. He grew up in the rubble economy of the docks, a big silent boy who hauled crates for bread money, who watched longshoremen wrestle swinging cargo twice their weight, and who learned the first law of his life before he learned long division. Everything eventually goes to the ground. At 13, he sailed for America. Mid-Atlantic, a storm hit the ship. The crew told the story once. While grown men strapped themselves into their bunks, the boy stood out on the pitching deck, knees soft, hands loose, riding it. A crewman screamed at him to get below. The boy stayed where he was. He wasn't being brave, he was hungry to learn. The United States Air Force found him in 1953. He started judo 6 years later, because this was the era when the general who ran America's bombers decided that his crew should know how to fall, and the Air Force began flying plane loads of sergeants to Tokyo, to the Kodokan, the mother temple of judo. Most of them came home with sore hips and a good story. Carl Vandermeer came home with a name. On his first tour, the Kodokan instructors lined up their young black belts for randori, practice matches, one after another. And the big American stood in the middle of that room for 2 hours while the best of them took turns trying to put him down. When it was over, the oldest instructor on the floor bowed and gave him a name that translates loosely as the pillar. The name was not a compliment. It was a reminder of that day, of how he stood and held without twitching. At Travis Air Force Base, they still talked about the hangar. A strip of mats rolled out across the concrete, a line of airmen in flight suits, and Vandermeer working through them like a machine set to a metronome. He takes the grip, turns, throws. Then, the next man, one throw per breath. Men going over at the front of the line while the ones at the back counted heads and worked out how long they had. In the Air Force, they teach you one thing above anything else. Nobody beats the ground. Carl Vandermeer believed it. He treated the concrete as a partner, and every man he met as a guest arriving there. Tokyo, 1964. The Olympics come to judo's homeland, and the Americans arrive with a 31-year-old team captain who does not smile for photographs. In the semifinal round, he faced a Soviet heavyweight, 6'4", forearms like mooring rope, a man who had folded every opponent in his path. The match lasted 8 seconds. The grip closed, the world tilted, and the big man went over like a door ripped from its hinges. One full turn through a wall of flashbulbs before crashing into the timekeeper's table. The scoreboard hadn't finished spelling Vandermeer's name. Then the streak began. Chicago, Frankfurt, Osaka, Sao Paulo. 61 international matches over 11 years, 61 wins. Referees began standing a step closer to his matches, not because they expected trouble, but because they knew how quickly it would be over. In Frankfurt, in 1965, a German heavyweight prepared for him with 6 months of film study. He told the papers he had found a hole in the American's grip. The match lasted 11 seconds. Afterward, the German sat in the tunnel a long time, looking at his hands, trying to figure out what went wrong, because he was sure he had prepared a counter for his every move. What happened was a match that finished so fast he doubted his whole career. Judo has a word for the exact moment a man begins to fall. Kuzushi, the moment balance breaks. Before the throw, before the grip, there is that half instant when a man's weight leaves him. Whoever holds the Kuzushi becomes superior to the other. Many judokas spend their lives trying to find it. Few ever do. Opponents tried everything on Carl Vandermeer. Strength, speed, rage. They even tried to break the rules just to beat him on the mat. 61 of the strongest men on the planet. Nobody ever found his Kuzushi. The man who finally was standing on a stage in Long Beach holding a microphone.
All even in the judo boys at my counter kept saying one number. 61. 61. In my trade, you respect a number like that.
In the spring of 1967, a young lieutenant at Travis walked into the base gym with a magazine rolled up in his hand. A Chinese-American film actor, 90 minutes down the coast in Los Angeles. He was doing things at martial arts tournaments that grown men argued were impossible. A few weeks later, someone brought the film, 16mm, shot from the stands, grainy as gravel. A small man places his fist 1 inch from a big man's chest. The big man flies backward into a chair. They ran it 3 times in the rec room at Travis. The lieutenant kept looking over at the captain, waiting for a verdict. Carl Vandermeer watched with his arms folded, and when the tail of the film slapped the reel, he said exactly one word: chair. Because look where the volunteer lands. There is always a chair. A man who is pushed stumbles. A man who is placed falls into furniture. To Vandermeer, this was not a demonstration. It was a production. Balance was his life's work, his science. And 90 minutes down the coast, 4,000 people at a time were applauding what he was certain was a magic trick. You have to understand what those tournaments were in 1967. The martial arts in America were not one world. They were a dozen small nations at a permanent Cold War. Karate men called boxers brawlers. Boxers called karate dancing. Judo men watched all of it from behind folded arms. Borders then. Each school had its own building, its own lineage, its own answer to express its art. Certainty is easy when nothing crosses the line to argue with it. Into that Cold War walked a 26-year-old from Hollywood. He said on television, smiling, most of what they all taught was wasted motion. Half the country knew his face as Kato, the sidekick from a canceled superhero show. At the time, cameras were not able to capture his motion, they said. The other half knew the tournament rumors. People barely knew who he was, other than his being a movie star. That summer, the International Karate Championships came to Long Beach. Vandermeer bought his own ticket. He asked one man to come with him, the sergeant who had been his training partner and his corner since 1959. The arena that night held 4,000 people, and the heat of every one of them. Press row down front, flashbulbs going off in strings, karate men from 11 countries, and in the third row, in a gray suit, with his hands folded in his lap, a man who had come to watch only one thing. Late in the evening, he got it. The demonstration, the one you have already seen, the folding chair, the volunteer, a heavyweight, half a foot taller, braced and ready, the fist floating 1 inch out, the crowd counting down without being asked to. The fist traveled the 1 inch in the blink of an eye and reached the opponent. The impact made him fly in the air for a moment and sit on the chair, and right there is where the famous reel runs out. The newsreel man lowered his camera because the scheduled part of the evening was over. The applause was still climbing when one voice came through it.
Applause is money in my trade. Full house clapping means lines at the stand. Then one voice went through it like a nail through a paper cup. I've seen hecklers, drunks, loudmouths, fellas wanted to be seen. This wasn't that. He wasn't performing. He stood there like a man waiting on change he was owed.
He didn't shout. That is the detail every survivor of that night agrees on first. He stood up in the third row and spoke, just like a man speaks across a card table. And somehow, 4,000 people heard every word. Sit him down. Try it on a man who isn't paid to fall. The applause faltered, confused, patchy, dying in sections like stadium lights being switched off one bank at a time. And then he turned, not to the stage, to the crowd, to the people around him, as if the man on the stage were a prop he was finished addressing. Nowadays, Hollywood teaches falling better than it teaches punching. 4,000 heads swung back toward the stage in a single motion. The master of ceremonies made a strange little sound into the microphone, not quite a word. The press row came alive at once, like someone had kicked a beehive. Flashbulbs swung toward the third row, everyone suddenly trying to see what was happening. Somewhere in the dark, one half of the arena was whispering to the other half who that was. Words like Olympic captain and Air Force flew in the air. The whisper did Vandermeer's introductions for him. And the small man on the stage, the fastest hands anyone in that building had ever seen, a man who had just been called a paid act in front of 4,000 people, smiled. He put his hand out for the microphone. He looked down at the man in the third row for a long, friendly moment, and into the silence, pleasantly, like a host at a dinner party, he said, "Every magician needs a volunteer. May I borrow you?" The walk from the third row to the stage stairs took 11 steps. The arena was silent for all 11. Vandermeer came up the steps like a man boarding an aircraft, unhurried, certain. And what he did first became one of the most argued about details of the whole night. He walked past Bruce Lee. He took the folding chair, the famous chair the volunteer had flown into, and he set it aside at the edge of the stage with one hand, the way you would move a coat rack, no chair. He rolled his sleeves to the elbow, slow, unhurried, like a man getting ready for a shift at the docks. What happened next took more attention from the crowd than the show itself. Then he stood in the center of the stage and said, at a volume the whole arena could hear, "Move me, one step, one shoe, use both hands. Take a running start if you like. Do that, and I will bow to you on this stage." A pause. Fail. and you take that microphone and you tell them what this is. That was the whole wager. No money, no belt, no trophy. 2 men's words in front of 4,000 witnesses. If Bruce Lee could move him, an Olympic captain would bow to a Hollywood actor in public. If he could not, the fastest rising name in American martial arts would stand on a stage in his own backyard, hold a microphone, and confess to a fraud. And understand what was sitting on the table for Bruce Lee. It was 1967. The television show was gone, canceled that spring. The film offers stopped. What Bruce Lee had, all he had, was the thing 4,000 people at a time were willing to believe about it. If an Olympic captain stood on that stage unmoved and made him say the word staged into a microphone in his own backyard, there would be no coming back from that. Bruce Lee undid the button of his jacket. He was still smiling. But the people in the front row said afterward that the smile had changed. It had stopped being a showman's smile and become something more dangerous. For the people who knew Bruce Lee, he was not a man in need of proving himself. He was doing what he was meant to do. But when a challenge like this comes up in front of 4,000 people, you have no choice but to prove yourself. And in this case, he did more than that.
That's when my line emptied out. A fellow walked off mid-order, left 35 cents sitting on my counter. I watched from the tunnel mouth. The blonde man was speaking to the crowd as if he owned the show.
The first push was almost polite, one palm flat against the chest. Vandermeer's eyes didn't move. His feet didn't move. Nothing moved. The second push was different. Bruce Lee planted his feet, lowered his hips, and drove forward, both hands and his whole body behind them. 135 pounds of Bruce Lee went straight into the 231 pounds of the Olympic judoka in front of him. For a full second, the air got thick. They were locked together, legs shaking, seams straining, while 4,000 people rose to their feet almost without realizing it. Then they saw the movement. The sole of Bruce Lee's shoe slipped half an inch backward. The tiny squeak carried all the way to the last row. Vandermeer looked down at him the way a bridge looks at weather, and somebody laughed. One man somewhere up in the dark, then his whole section, then the floor, then all of it. 4,000 people laughing at Bruce Lee. The flashbulbs were firing again, but they felt different now. The master of ceremonies started across the stage with his hand already out for the microphone, wearing the smile that feels like he just ended a Chinese man's career. 11 years of balance had just beaten the fastest man in America, twice, in public. The confession was one sentence away. Down in press row, one photographer quietly advanced his film and checked the counter. 9 frames left on the roll. But on those frames, he felt something odd in the way the Chinese man was standing. Bruce Lee got to the microphone first. He picked it up, and he waited. This is the detail the survivors argue about least. He waited calmly, while 4,000 people laughed at him. Waited until the laughter had gotten comfortable. He's right. Another wave of laughter roared. People were not expecting him to admit defeat. Pushing doesn't work. That's why nobody in the history of fighting has ever won by pushing. And now the silence was total, 4,000 people, and you could hear the air conditioning. May I show you what does? What happened next took 9 seconds. The photographer got his camera up in time for almost all of it. And if you have ever wondered what 9 seconds can be worth, the frames on that roll are the answer. Vandermeer was generous now. He was a teacher who had made his point, playing to a crowd that had just laughed with him, and he could afford one demonstration for the slow students. He reached out, unhurried, and took Bruce Lee's wrist, the grip that had ended 61 matches, and he said the last 4 words. First lesson, Mr. Lee, frame 1. The sweep comes, the same foot sweep that had folded Olympic heavyweights, fast and flat and honest. And Bruce Lee is not there. He has hopped it, small and neat, like a man skipping a curb. But Vandermeer flows, sweep into palm, one motion short and heavy, and the palm lands, square on the chest. Bruce Lee goes back 2 full steps, arms flaring for the air, and 4,000 people take one breath at the same instant. Real contact. For the first time all night, the small man has been hit. Frame 3. The answer comes back at a height nobody in the building expects. Low, a side kick, whipped into the meat of Vandermeer's thigh, into the nerve line above the knee, and 11 years of legend dips. 1 inch, 1 knee. The judoka's face does not change, but people with sharp eyes saw the truth. Frame 5. Vandermeer's forearm, short, brutal, a stripe of iron across the dark. Bruce Lee takes it on the shoulder and rolls it, but the tip of it clips his mouth. And that is frame 6. Years later, a magazine printed that frame. They called it a movie still. Bruce Lee wiping blood from his lip with his thumb and smiling. Genuinely smiling. Let me explain the smile. Bruce Lee always respected and enjoyed the existence of another martial artist. That's why he had been joining martial arts demonstrations plenty of times all his life. Frames 7 and 8. The final lunge, Vandermeer reaches for the lapel like he always does, but this time cannot find anything. His hand closes on empty air. Bruce Lee's elbow comes over the top and knocks the grip away. Then he slips out to the side, and just like that, he's gone. 2 meters away. His hands are low. He's waiting. 9 seconds. 2 men, 2 meters apart. 4,000 people not breathing. And there is confusion on the face of Carl Vandermeer. His eyes have narrowed to the width of a coin, and his breath has gone shallow. He was still trying to figure out how. The photographer had 1 frame left. He held it. Then Bruce Lee raised 1 finger, and slowly, so the whole arena could follow it, he turned the finger sideways, 1 inch. No chair, no volunteer. Stand the way you stood in Tokyo.
The press stopped shooting. All night them flashbolts had been popping strings, and now not one. 20 years I never saw a press row go dark before.
Carl Vandermeer set his feet. Understand what that means. This was the finest competitive base of his generation. Knees soft, hips settled. Weight poured down through the floor like a heavy wall had grown up around him. For 11 years, 61 of the strongest men on the planet had tried. They had pulled at it, hooked it, swept at it, thrown everything they had into breaking his balance. Not one succeeded, and now in front of him, the number 62 was standing. At least he thought it was. He said it the way he had said it in Tokyo. He said it like a man closing a vault. And Bruce Lee placed his knuckles 1 inch from his sternum and waited. 6 seconds, 6 full seconds, and the arena, 4,000 people, directed their attention to that 1 inch gap. The photographer said afterward that he didn't dare fire his last frame because in that silence, the shutter would have gone off like a gunshot. At the edge of the stage stood the folding chair. It was no longer getting the attention it had in the early hours of the night. 1 inch, the width of 2 fingers. That tiny gap held everything the man in the 3rd row had called a lie. And behind those knuckles was everything the smaller man had spent his whole life building. The fist moved. There was no wind-up. There wasn't enough room for one. Instead, everything Bruce Lee had ever built crossed that 1 inch of air at once. The floor, the ankle, the hip, the spine, the shoulder, the wrist, all of it closing at once like a whip made out of an entire man. Carl Vandermeer's heel lifted, and it spent quite some time in the air. At least it felt that way, because such gathered attention makes time itself seem to stretch. When his foot finally came down, he took 2 steps backward that he hadn't meant to take, the first backward steps of his professional career. Then the Olympic judo captain fell exactly the way the volunteer had fallen. The same angle, the same helpless turn, the same fall that 4,000 people had laughed at an hour earlier because they were sure it was acting. Except there was no chair this time. There was only thin air between him and the floor. In the front row, a karate master who had spent 20 years telling his students that judo fighters were just farmers shot out of his seat, both hands over his mouth. Somewhere behind him, a father lifted his son onto his shoulders, too late. And in press row, now the photographer fired. The 9th frame, the last on the roll. It holds everything. An Olympic captain flat on the boards of a Long Beach stage, and above him, already extended, an open hand. Judo has a word for the exact moment a man begins to fall. We already know it. 61 opponents spent 11 years hunting Carl Vandermeer's Kuzushi, and Bruce Lee found it 1 inch away from his sternum. He looked at the hand for a long moment. Then he took it. The arena did not cheer. That is the part the survivors described first. 4,000 people sat inside a silence. Some of them, they said later, were quietly thanking God for what they had seen, a defeat, a demonstration, or the end of an argument. Carl Vandermeer stood up. He walked to the edge of the stage, took his jacket off the chair and put it back on. He straightened it. And then, in front of 4,000 witnesses, the man who had thought it was just a magic trick bowed deep, slow. Without hesitation, he had lost, and he knew it. No one had asked him to admit it. Then the arena came apart, not for the punch, for the bow. And it was applause for 2 men, and every single person in that building rose to their feet. Somewhere down front, a sergeant from Travis knew why he had bowed. He had heard the reason that morning on an airplane in 7 words.
I've seen 4,000 people leave that building maybe 1,000 times. Winners go loud, losers quiet. That night they came out like church. The 35 cents was still on my counter when the show was over. Never did pick it up. Kept it in a jar. Still got it. Only tip I ever got for not selling a thing. I don't know judo. Don't know kung fu. But I know how to read a room. And that arena went in believing one thing and came out believing another. That's the only fight I ever saw that night.
The first push found his weight. The second found his center. The third used what the first 2 had taught him. And then the punch came. 61 opponents had tried to solve Carl Vandermeer with strength, with speed, with leverage, with rage. The man from Hollywood figured him out with a simple measurement. He did it right there in front of everyone, making it look like a failure, while 4,000 people laughed at what they thought was a failed trick. Vandermeer flew home the next morning. He never filed a report about that night. He gave no interviews about it. And in 20 more years around the sport, his students checked. He never once used the word staged again about anything. But at Travis Air Force Base, sometime in 1968, a new section was added to the combatives curriculum: short-range power, structure over distance. The material was kept in a folder with an unofficial name typed across the tab by some sergeant with a sense of history. The Lee problem. Officers who asked about the folder got the same answer. There is a man in Los Angeles who does not require distance. Prepare for that. He sent 2 of his best students south with a letter of introduction and 1 piece of advice: leave your rank at the door. They came back a few weeks later, moving differently. Their shoulders were more relaxed. They were less confident than before, but somehow better for it. He retired from competition in 1972 with his record still intact: 61 wins and 1 loss. If you count the match that appears in no federation's records, no film reel, and no official record anywhere in the world. Only 9 photographs and the memories of 4,000 people say it ever happened. He taught at Travis until 1981. He died in 2001 in his sleep in a small house with a judo mat in the garage. Bruce Lee never spoke about that night except when someone asked him once, years later, about hecklers, and he said, "I did a demonstration in 1967, 4,000 people. Not all of them fans, you see. One man stood up and called it a trick, and it taught me how fast the eye fools the mind. The crowd believed me in 1 second and believed him in the next. Very few see through what they watch. Belief is fast, you see? It moves at the speed of the eye. Truth is slow. It moves at the speed of touch. That night, only one man was slow enough to see the truth. I still remember him. The 9 photographs were never published together. For decades, they have stayed in the same place, a paper envelope inside a metal cabinet at a Veterans Hall in Northern California, kept by the only other man who flew down that morning. And the famous reel, the one you have seen, still ends where it always ended. A volunteer in a chair, a small man turning to a crowd, applause like a wave. And over the years, it became one of the most controversial reels. They called it Hollywood, staged, a trick. The film ran out 4 minutes early, that's all. As for the war between the styles, it went on. The dojos kept arguing. The magazines kept score. But the 4,000 who were in that building had learned something harder to forget. A punch you can describe is a story. A punch that lands is a fact. For 11 years, gravity had never failed him. Then, on a summer night in Long Beach, in front of 4,000 people, it finally caught up with him over a distance of exactly 1 inch. 1 inch. The distance between what everyone believed and what one man decided to see for himself. He got his answer. Then he bowed. Somewhere in a metal cabinet in a Veterans Hall, Frame 9 is still waiting for the world. An Olympic captain lies on the floor of a stage that, according to history, he was never supposed to have stood on, and above him forever an open hand. The reel you have seen ends with applause. The night ended with a bow. Water does not argue with the stone. It keeps moving, and one day the stone is left behind.